Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Outside Insider here on Philly Sports Network with myself, Liam Jenkins. I hope you've had a good week so far. It's been a quiet one and I don't like it. It's caught me off guard a little bit and we'll get to why in just a couple of moments. If you're new around here, make sure you're hitting subscribe, whether it's iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. There's loads of them, YouTube. I'm even on an ultrasound scan. I was talking about Nick Foles when I was in the womb, 1995. I saw this coming a mile away, so if you find that VHS, slip it in. You'll hear Fetus Liam talking about cornerbacks and cover 2, so there's some nice content for you. But it does mean a lot that you've tuned into the show. Welcome to what is a very special episode. And it's not special because it was Valentine's Day yesterday, because as you all know, my love life is about as exciting as the New York Jets 2018 season. Only difference is they're not longing after a former player. So there's that going for them. But we have got a very special guest to break down today's show. And the reason for that is, do you know what? As I said before, it's one of the quietest weeks. So we've got to inject some spice. And we may have accidentally found the most explosive podcast in all of Philadelphia sports today. Now, this week in itself has worried me quite a lot. And I liken this to the fact that this week has been like my dog. Now, I've got a 9-year-old Jack Russell that does my head in at the best of times. Now, if you know dog breeds and you're familiar with Jack Russells, you know that it's like they live as if they've constantly just sniffed a line of cocaine. Like, they're sprinting about, they're smashing into stuff, they're eating cat poo, like, it never ends. So, if I get home and I'm like, the dog's just mullered a blanket and is eating it all and it's just pooing everywhere, like, I know it's had a good day. If I get home and the dog doesn't move and it doesn't get up and excited when I get home, I'm a bit worried. I'm like, well, what's gone on there? And that's kind of like what happened with the Eagles this week. Like, nothing of note really happened. Now, I take a lot of pride in the content that we put out during these stretches because I feel like this is what separates the men from the boys. Like, are you going to put out content for the sake of it, or can you still find a way to make it meaningful? And I think I've been really blessed this week where a couple of our pieces have been pinned on Bleacher Report, so thank you to everyone that's checked those out. But I wanted to hit this week's podcast with just the most excitement that we possibly could. And there was only one name I could turn to. Now, if you listened to last week's show, you'll remember that I sent out an open invitation to one Eliot Shorr-Parks to come onto the show and talk shop about all of those controversial topics that we've come to know and love in the early stages of this offseason. And believe it or not, ESP himself replied to a tweet and we got it working. So I slid into the DMs. Here we are. 2019, we're hitting the ground running. And I think this is our first podcast guest as well. So we're going out there with some explosiveness. So if you are not a follower of ESP, if you're not familiar with who he is, we'll get into that as well. But whether you love him, whether you hate him, he's like the Dark Knight of Eagles Twitter. This is the show that's hopefully going to shed some light on himself as a person, and of course, breaking down those topics, having a back and forth on the big discussions. It's going to be a lot of fun. And after that, we've got some more updates on the whole Go Outside Liam Jenkins Get a Life commenter. We've got that coming up. And of course, Thank You Next as well. But without further ado, it's time to get down and dirty. That sounds bad. Let's not put that in there. But it's in the show now, so it's a bit late. We've got to talk Eagles with Eliot Shorr-Parks. All right, here we go. Okay, so it's now the most explosive part of any podcast show in history ever, I think, potentially at this stage. So joining me today for the first time on the Outside Insider, Eliot Shorr-Parks of 94 WIP. Eliot, how are you doing?
What's going on, man? I'm excited to finally be on your show. I always see it in my mentions, see people tweeting about you, so I'm excited to be on.
So you're just borderline flirting now. I mean, it's been a wild off-season so far, but obviously just for some context for those who maybe aren't as familiar, although I can't imagine why they wouldn't be. So Eliot, before last season you were with NJ.com, you've just recently this year moved over to 94 WIP. I mean, how's that transition been for you so far?
Been great. I mean, I loved my time at NJ.com. I was there for 5 years, I think. So it was like my first real professional gig in terms of covering the Eagles full time. But growing up in Philadelphia, 94 WIP was everything. That is Philly sports. So being able to be over there and work with guys I grew up listening to and some, great young talent too, like I'm super pumped and just getting used to doing the radio thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's always fun now to see writers kind of moving out into podcasts and that sort of thing. And you've got your own with the Go Birds pod. How's the first season of that been going down for you?
Good. Doing it with John Barchard and James Seltzer was awesome transition from what I did at NJ.com. We do a few episodes a week, and they've both been in radio for a long time. So transitioning into that has been really cool. I mean, both of them really don't know much about the Eagles, so I kind of have to school them every once in a while. But it's all good. It's a good time. I'm lucky to be able to work with two guys like that.
That's awesome to hear. So in terms of what we're going to do on this show today, I mean, the one thing I've noticed since I made Philly Sports Network is there's never really a quiet week when it comes to the Eagles. Even in the most mundane February imaginable, there's always going to be something that's stirring up. And over the last couple of months, we've seen quarterback controversies in many senses. We've seen potential deals with Fournette and Ramsey and all these different suggestions moving around. Mm-hmm. So I thought it would be a good idea to kind of just go down as many topics as possible, have a debate about them, and just see where we kind of end up. So if we start with the most recent one, obviously very recently there's been plenty of debate about Antonio Brown, what the Eagles could potentially give to get him. Is it worth signing him? And I believe you're on one side of the fence and I may be on the other on this one. So what are your views on this whole acquiring Antonio Brown situation?
Well, let's hear your views first. What do you think of it?
The way I personally view it is that this team has worked insanely hard over the last couple of years to kind of pump out any headache from the locker room. So whether that's going to be diva personalities, whether that's off-the-field controversies when you're looking at lawsuits or getting involved with DUIs and stuff like that, I think you've already got a clear number one receiver. And depending how you read into this Carson Wentz selfishness report and how deep you want to go and look at the relationships players have, you could make the case that Alshon Jeffrey would understandably be frustrated. Whether or not he's gone out and said anything to a reporter is very much up for discussion. But you don't want to rock the boat. I mean, having Alshon Jeffrey, you're paying him a lot of money. I think it's $11 million off the top of my head. To demote him immediately to a WR2 and having Antonio Brown outside, it's just rocking the boat too much. And it's almost, I think, too much personality for one position, if that makes sense.
So my thing on that is, obviously, Antonio Brown has a reputation, and it's really a reputation he's only earned, in the past 5 or 6 months. So you didn't hear a ton about this prior to last year. But two things. First, everyone talks about Doug's culture and what he's built and how players love to play for the Eagles and how Doug's built a great locker room and the leadership. And it's true. As someone that's in there every day, I mean, people said similar things about Jay Ajayi. Now, he's not the level of Antonio Brown in terms of his star and,
right,
what he makes and all that. But people said the same thing about Jay Ajayi, and that hasn't been an issue at all. So, look, could Antonio Brown come in and be an issue? Sure. I mean, it's possible. But at the same time, I've seen that Eagles locker room. I know guys like Zach Ertz, Alshon Jeffrey, Carson Wentz, really Malcolm Jenkins, those type of guys. I just don't think Antonio Brown would come in and be an issue. I just don't, because they would throw it to him. He would probably get a new deal if he came here. If not, he's already making good money. So I honestly don't think that would be an issue. But the second part of this is, I think people look at the Eagles and think their window to win is much larger than it is. Now,
right,
to a certain degree, Howie Roseman is always going to field a competitive team. As long as they're the Eagles, they'll always be a team that goes in with Super Bowl expectations. But at the same time, this team's window to win is not that big. They're old along the offensive line. They're old along the defensive line. Zach Ertz is obviously in his prime, but he's not exactly a young player either. I think this is his 7th year. So they really don't have a lot of young talent on the roster. And then the biggest part to me of it is you have to have Carson Wentz succeed this year. You absolutely have to. He cannot have a down year. And he's going to be better with Antonio Brown on the field. It's just the fact. I mean, you put Antonio Brown with Alshon, with Zach Ertz, and with, whatever they do at running back, Dallas Goedert as his backup tight end, they really have a chance. They could have the best offense in the NFC. So you bring Antonio Brown in, you make it work financially. You have 2 second-round picks already, so you would still have a second-round pick, assuming that's what it costs. So to me, I think people just overthink it. Antonio Brown's the best receiver in the NFL. You bring him in here and you see what happens.
Oh, I would argue DeAndre Hopkins on that front, but I think I understand what you're saying. I would just view it from the other point where you brought up a very valid point in that they are getting older right now, and there's a lot of uncertainty on this team going into the offseason. If we just take the offensive line, you've got Jason Kelsey debating retirement, you've got Jason Peters when no one knows if he's coming back, and if he does, he's on and off the sideline more than I have cups of tea in a day. And on the other side of it, you've got Brandon Brooks that's going to be nursing an injury, you've then got Isaac Seumalo and potentially Wisniewski battling over left guard. That battle's been raging on for nearly 3 years now. You need some depth there, and I think if you're going to plug close to $12 million on Antonio Brown for a second wide receiver. You're already paying Alshon 11. It's upsetting the apple cart too much. Like, you're right, this is a must-win season for the Eagles, and if Carson Wentz needs a big year, he's got to be protected. And in a very worst-case scenario, if all the wrong dominoes fall down and that offensive line isn't what we thought it would be, or there are injuries, or we can't have Vaitai stepping up in the way we thought, then you're going to have headaches, and player frustrations will mount. And if there's ever a player that's going to get frustrated, it's Antonio Brown.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Like, I see your point about the offensive line. Yes, in an ideal world, I would give that $12 million to a stud left tackle, or I would give it to, two really good backups, right? But really good offensive linemen don't really hit the free agency market, and and especially at left tackle, you very rarely see a stud left tackle switch teams. I mean, honestly, I'm sure there's other examples, but one of the best examples is Jason Peters himself, and that was, 8 years ago, something like that? Yeah. So very rarely do you see left tackle switch. The other thing I would say, Jason Peters, I was in the camp of you have to move on from him, but when you actually, take a step back and look at what he did last year, his play towards the end of the year was better than people give it credit for. And I feel like with offensive linemen especially, if they have a rough start to the season, it's hard for them to ever recover from that reputation because you see them give up a sack, and then you're like, okay, well, he sucks. But Jason Peters, towards the end of the year, I thought played a lot better, and he stayed on the field a lot more. He did miss snaps against the Saints, absolutely, but prior to that, I think he was at 93% of the snaps in something like 7 of the 8 last games or something like that. So he did improve as the year went on. And so I see your point. Yes, how he's going to build this team from the inside out. He's always going to value the line. But at the same time, I would rather give $12 million to Antonio Brown, knowing that's a sure thing, an absolute stud sure thing, than gamble on offensive linemen. When in reality, the only way you're probably going to get quality offensive linemen is through the draft, and you have those draft picks to do that.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, the only other aspect of the Antonio Brown saga that I worry about is the fitting in the offense. And, I mean, we can look back at that Golden Tate trade and we can say...
But how would he not fit, though?
I wouldn't say it's more of just a fit. I would say it's that if you're moving Alshon Jeffrey to number 2, I mean, it's not like Antonio Brown will come in hypothetically and be like, okay, if I get 2 targets a game on 20, I'm happy as long as the team's winning. I don't associate that kind of personality with him. He's a designated number 1 guy. He always has been. And if you look at the last year, even with the emergence of Juju Smith-Schuster, even with the kind of battles of Le'Veon Bell and the Steelers are one of the most unbuttoned up franchises imaginable anyway. But I can't see him just kind of coming in, immediately being a cultural fit and then being on the field. And if he's not getting those targets, it reminds me very much of an Odell Beckham type situation, which is obviously another receiver that's been thrown out. I just think there's a lot more to this than just what we see on the field, because if you're going to spam the ball to Antonio Brown, is that not a direct opposite of everyone that's been hammering the table of the Zach Ertz favoritism argument?
Yeah, but what's the point of having this amazing culture and people talking about want to play for the Eagles if then you can't bring anybody in that doesn't have a pristine reputation? I mean, if you're talking about bringing Antonio Brown into a young locker room, then yes, I could see how he would come in and dominate. But I can tell you, he's not going to come into Philadelphia and dominate. That's just not going to happen. They have too much veteran leadership, especially if Jason Peters is back. Jason Kelce, I believe, will be back. Carson Wentz, to whatever you want to think of that Philly voice report. At the end of the day, he's still a dominant personality when he's on the field. Antonio Brown's not going to come in and do that. And the Eagles wouldn't bring him in unless he said he wasn't going to. Now, I understand he can say one thing and do another, sure. But if you have Antonio Brown and this team wins like they could with him, he's not really going to be able to complain. I mean, you never heard Antonio Brown complaining prior to when things went bad with the Steelers. So if things go bad with the Eagles next year and they go 7-9, then they got a lot bigger issues than Antonio Brown complaining. He can complain all he wants, but if this team's 7-9, he's far down the list of their worries. So I think you bring him in and you gamble on his talent, and you just say, look, this team needs offense. I mean, the offense was the reason they weren't good last year. And Antonio Brown's not a quote-unquote deep threat. He's not thought of in that way, but he certainly, if not DeAndre Hopkins, is a top 3 receiver. So you bring him in, and yeah, Alshon's number 2 because Alshon's not as good as Antonio Brown. So, I would just suck for Alshon, but it is what it is. So I just think you bring talent in and you figure it out from there.
It's interesting. It's really interesting to hear kind of both back and forth on that front. Again, guys, if you're listening, leave a comment down below. Let us know what you think on this situation. You mentioned one name there. I think we could debate Antonio Brown all day. Let's talk briefly about Carson Wentz. And obviously this report that came out that caused so much headache. I mean, it honestly drove me insane for the most part. But now the dust has settled, Wentz has come out and somewhat combated it in the best way possible. But what are your views on that report? Does it have validity? Was it overblown? Is the fact the writers literally made his Twitter private a sign? Like, I mean, where do you stand on this sort of Carson Wentz saga?
Yeah, so the thing that I've learned from covering an NFL locker room for 7 years is you could have 10 people in the locker room that feel really strongly, and then you could have 50 that don't. And I mean, just reality is like, it's like with Chip Kelly. Like, everyone thought that everybody hated Chip Kelly. But I know for a fact there were guys in that locker room that loved Chip Kelly.
Yeah.
So the reason I think this ties to Carson is I absolutely believe that piece that Joe wrote, the players he spoke to, and he mentioned, I think, up to 6 in there is what he said he talked to. I absolutely believe that's what they said about Carson, right? But that doesn't mean that everybody feels that way about Carson. And I can only speak to my experience in the locker room and what players I talked to said about Carson. And I think that, like, is Carson a little stubborn, and does he have, like, a little bit more of an ego than people think? Yeah, I do think that is the case. But I don't believe Carson is an issue in the locker room by any means. I just think, you know, and Carson honestly said it in his article, and not in his article, in his interview he did, saying, you know, I was hurt. I was kind of on the sideline. I was separated from guys because of rehab. And, like, let's be honest, what Carson went through was really, really hard to go through. Yeah. He literally saw another quarterback come in and outplay him, right? I mean, this was Nick Foles' team for the last 2 years when you now look back at it. He won the Super Bowl. He won the biggest games. He stepped up in the biggest spots. So I'm sure that was really hard for Carson. But going forward, I don't think Carson's personality is an issue in the locker room.
No, I mean, I completely agree on that front. And a lot of people overlook this Carson Wentz debate, and I've said it a lot of times as well, is that you look at that Super Bowl window, so from week 15 through to, let's say, week 3 when Wentz returned, the team's working out as Nick Foles is your number one quarterback. And that's with a new offensive coordinator who needs to build that relationship with his quarterback. So when Wentz finally returns, everything's out of sync a little bit. The receivers are so used to playing with him as their guy, like the placement, the timing, and then you're kind of being asked to run the Nick Foles show, and Carson's got every right to be a bit, well, hang on a minute, this is my team, I don't want to do what he did, like, this is me. There's bound to be a little bit of rigidness there, and I think he's absolutely right. If he came in there with no complaints whatsoever and just kind of got his head down and did it, I'd be a little bit concerned that competitive fire, like, wasn't there for the quarterback position, because I can imagine a situation where it's almost like an understudy comes in, does significantly better, and you not being even slightly annoyed about it.
Right. No, yeah, I agree. I mean, but here's the only thing I would say. Like, I think that sometimes it reaches a point with Carson where people make so many excuses for him. Right. But at the end of the day, like, Carson is the franchise quarterback, and he has to perform like it. Like, yes, in 2017, he was really, really good until he got hurt. But he did get hurt. And last year, they were 5-6 with him as a starter, and you can blame you can blame, you know, the injury, all types of things. At the end of the day, the offense was the issue. This team did not win last year when Carson was there. I know the defense improved when Foles got in, but the defense was also like one of the top 10 in the league while Carson was in there. The issue was the offense was one of the 10 worst in the league. So at the end of the day, yes, maybe there was some adjustment and all that, but those excuses are out the window now for next year. Like, I don't want to hear anything next year about Carson's back, about recovering from the ACL, about anything. Carson has to come in next year, and he has to play at a very high level. And if he doesn't, then I think, you know, midway through the 4th year of his career, you really start to have to look at him differently than what many people projected him to be midway through his 2nd year.
Sure, the only, I guess, counter to that would be even on that down year, which many consider, where it's nowhere near as impressive as what we saw in 2017, because I guess the magical coating was taken off, was he was still putting up numbers comparable to Tom Brady's MVP campaign in 2017, which kind of dazzles me considering how much he went through both physically, mentally, and whatever. But going from one quarterback to another, this is going to be the hot one, I'm sure. So Nick Foles, and this is developed, I'd say, exponentially over the last couple of weeks with the Eagles saying, hey, we're going to give him the 20 mil, and then Foles going, no, I'm going to walk away. What's your view been on this? Because, I mean, I'm very strongly on one fence from what I've been told from a couple of sources around the league and what the Eagles are going to do moving forward. If you're the GM, what would you do with Nick Foles at this point? Do you just let him ride off into the sunset, or are you going to come back and see what you can get for him?
So I have 2 very different answers to this. The first is what I think they will. What I think they will do. Right. This is like just from talking to people what I think they're going to do. Nick Foles will not be back on the roster next year. Now, how that happens? Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. So that now, like, I don't think they'll be able to trade him just because of complications.
Yeah.
I mean, Howie, who knows what he could pull off? He is very good at his job, so it's possible. But I just think there's too many complications in terms of why would a team trade for Foles when you could just sign him as a free agent? And the Eagles are not going to franchise him. So it doesn't make any sense. So who knows? Maybe it happens, but I would be very surprised. Now, from my perspective, what I would do if I was running the Eagles, I would bring Nick Foles back. And if I had to franchise him to do it, I would do it. And the reason is because there's only how many good quarterbacks in the NFL? 20, 25 maybe, right?
Sure.
Like, there's not that many good quarterbacks, and the Eagles have 2 of them. And when you take into account Carson's injury history and all those things, like, I'm just not willing to let Nick Foles walk. I just think he's too valuable of a commodity. Now, I understand, the counters people will say, which is, well, what about Carson? Well, Carson hasn't earned the right to have his emotions taken into consideration when it comes to this decision. If Carson didn't want Nick Foles here, he should have stayed healthy. I know it's out of his control, but it's a business. If Carson's getting hurt, I can't, as much as I think Nate Sudfeld has a lot of potential, if it's week 11 and Carson goes down and the Eagles are 9-2 or whatever they are, like, Nate Sudfeld has no NFL experience to a certain degree. So I know that Nick Foles is a better backup. And I'll also say that last year, when Carson was playing, there was zero talk about Nick Foles, right? Like, he was a forgotten man. I can tell you from being in that locker room, like, he even grew a beard out. Like, it was like he was barely not even around, right? Like, so it really only became an issue once Carson got hurt again and Nick Foles once again stepped in and played really well. So, if Carson gets hurt next year and Nick Foles comes in and plays really well, it'll absolutely be a terrible thing for Carson. But you know what? If Carson gets hurt for the 3rd straight year, I'm happy I have Nick Foles at that point. So I would absolutely bring Foles back if I were the Eagles.
I understand that, and I think that, I was writing an article recently and saying, hey, if they bring it back, franchise and restructured, that would be far more likely than a tag and trade move at this point. Like, if you're going to compare the two, that would be the more feasible scenario. But if Foles, the thing to bear in mind with Nick Foles is that he said at the start of last season that he wants to start again in the NFL. Super Bowl 52 MVP, who can blame him, right? Like, you're going to want that starting experience. So he then comes in again and performs very well in the postseason. Like, there's going to be somewhat of a market there. Now, does he want to be a bridge quarterback? Does he want to sit again and be behind Carson Wentz? Because if you're Foles at this point and the Eagles go to and go, right, we want to bring you back, and he goes, okay, what's my role? Well, you're still a backup. And you're not going to be, if you're Nick Foles, seething that after everything you've done in the last 2 years, when your starting quarterback can't get it done and you come in and can, clearly, is that not a case of, I'm walking out? Like, I need to do what's best for me and my family. This isn't it. Like, would that not be, like, coming into the equation? Or is Nick Foles really that selfless to go, okay, cool, I'll sit on the bench and wait for another year and just collect my millions?
Yeah, I mean, it honestly doesn't really matter because it's a franchise tag, and unless he's going to hold out and turn down $25 million, he can't leave. So, look, do I think Foles wants the opportunity to start? Yes, I do believe he wants that. But you also have to look at what's out there. Like, it's not like Foles can just say, I want to start, and he walks into an amazing situation. Yeah. The Dolphins, potentially, that situation sucks. The Raiders, it looks like they're going to keep Carr. Even if they didn't, that situation is not ideal. Everyone points to the Jaguars, and I get why that makes a lot of sense. But I don't know, man. If I was Foles, I would be really hesitant to go down to an organization like that. One that has, overall, other than that 1 year, has been terrible. I know he's, the John D. Filippo connection is there, which is a potential help. But at the end of the day, that's not really, you have a defensive head coach. Like, I really don't think that is as good of a situation as everyone else does. So, although, yes, Foles does say, I want to start, like, the thing that Foles says way more when he talks about it is he wants to be somewhere that he can be happy, somewhere he can trust his coaching staff, somewhere he could be in a special environment. Like, that is what Foles talks about a lot more than wanting to start. And I just think that if Foles goes to another situation, outside of maybe the Giants, I don't think he's going to be happy. So I think it's a blessing in disguise for Foles if he gets to come back here.
I can see that. So let's play devil's advocate for a second and say the Eagles do franchise tag Foles. Foles is reluctant to work out a restructure because he just wants out after that point. He's like, you know what, I've had it. I want to start elsewhere after. Fair enough. Is at that point, what do the Eagles do? Because then you already pressed against the cap. You then take another $25 million. You're going to have to free it up somewhere along the line. I mean, who's going to be the fall guy in that front? Is it just a combination of guys like Timmy Jernigan and Jason Peters? And then does that further complicate things?
You mean in terms of opening up cap space to keep Foles at $25 million?
Yeah, I know. I mean, Howie Roseman's literally turned Rodney McLeod into a homeless man this year for his contract, but we can't expect that for, I guess everyone throughout the team. So, what moves are you making in that situation just to accommodate that sort of move?
Right. Well, it is funny how, and I know you're on Eagles Twitter all the time, so you're well aware. It is funny how people are always like, who worries about cap space, blah, blah, blah. But then when it comes to Nick Foles, it's like, what about cap space? So people can't have it both ways. You can't sit there and always say how he worked it out and then also say you can't keep Foles for cap space. But I will say that to your point, like, yeah, it would have to be Timmy Jernigan. Maybe Jason Peters takes a pay cut, how he moves some things around. I mean, look, he has the ability to do it. So, look, it's definitely going to be tough. I agree. Like, to me, the biggest point of not keeping Foles is more because of the salary cap space. It's not the $25 million per se. It's not Carson. It's more just figuring it out because of where they're at. So I acknowledge that is something that would have to work out. But I would also say, like, to everyone saying they wouldn't be able to put a good team around Carson, like, Nick Foles came in with basically the same roster that Carson would have next year if they brought Foles back. Nick went in last year and took him to the playoffs and won a playoff game and almost beat the Saints. So, like, the idea that Carson won't be able to compete with the current roster that he has, I don't think is true.
Yeah, I'd agree with that one. We had a question on Twitter as well come in, basically talking about Brandon Graham and what the future for him holds and whether or not he's going to be worth paying. Obviously a veteran, he's been with the team since he was first drafted, big locker room guy, obviously very friendly with the media as well. What is the future looking like for Brandon Graham? Is it going to be a free agency situation or will the Eagles look to bring him back, do you think?
So it wouldn't surprise me if Brandon Graham hit free agency because he's wanted a deal from them, and now at this point, he might as well wait to see what's out there. I can't really decide what I think his market's going to be like. On one hand, obviously he's like a big pro football focused guy in terms of just you see the production he has with hurries and all that, and I think when you watch him, you can see the impact he has when healthy. He's very strong against the run. But his sack total is not great, and he's coming off of a really low year in that. So I'm not exactly sure how much money will be out there for him. I do think the Eagles would like to have him back, and I know he wants to be back. So I think if he hits free agency or at least gets a vibe of what will be out there for him, and it's not going to be anything crazy, I think that there's a pretty decent chance he is back with the Eagles. If I had to put it as like a percentage, I would go like 51% he's back. So I do think it's definitely on the fence. But I just think when both sides want it and the Eagles really need Graham back, I think that they'll figure out a way to make it happen.
This is a scenario I thought up as well, and I thought if anyone can, I guess, have a take on this, it's going to be yourself. If Graham walks and Derek Barnett is then assumed to be a starter and steps up, are you immediately going to go, well, that's a step back? Or are you comfortable and confident with Derek Barnett being a starter for a full 16-game season?
So I think that Derek Barnett could give you what Brandon Graham gave you last year, but Brandon Graham also had a really poor start to the season because of, he was coming off that foot injury. He missed all of training camp. I think he himself would admit he probably wasn't in the best shape because it's tough to do cardio when you have an ankle injury. But in terms of Barnett versus Graham, I think that, yes, like you could argue you might get the same production. But the issue with that is the Eagles have really been great on the defensive line because of their depth and their ability to swap guys in and out. So yes, maybe Barnett comes in and gives you what Graham does, but then who gives you what Barnett would have off the bench? Like Josh Sweat, I was a fan of that pick. I think he has potential. Just seeing him in person, like the dude is a freak of nature in terms of being an athlete. But he only played, I think, maybe 70 snaps last year, and he got hurt, and he didn't look amazing in those snaps. So I think he's definitely a question mark. So that would be my biggest concern. Like, yes, losing Graham, I think Barnett could maybe give you what Graham does, but it's the ripple effect of that I think would really have an impact on the team.
That's understandable. So moving forward, obviously we've got the commencement of the new league year coming up very soon. What are you thinking is going to be the main target for the Eagles? What's the big move that's going to come out?
Well, it's tough to say in terms of a specific player, but I would say overall, I think three areas, I would say. First, I just think Howie's always going to value the line. And so I think, like, when you look at the potential pass rushers that'll be out there, like, it would surprise me if DeMarcus Lawrence or Jadeveon Clowney actually hit the free agency market. But I do think you'll see some high-quality pass rushers out there. So I think if they don't work things out with Graham, or honestly, even if they do, I do think you'll see them go after that. But the other big thing I think you're going to see is just like how he's going to put an emphasis on speed. The Eagles offense did really not have any deep threats last year. I mean, my boy Jordan Matthews obviously got behind the defense a few times, but outside of that, like they really didn't have a deep threat. So I think you'll see Howie really focus on that. And I think you'll see a ripple effect of that with the running back, because I think they're going to try to add a much bigger threat to the passing game through a running back. But I think speed and pass rushing is going to be kind of their priorities in free agency and the draft.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I've always had this view with speed on this team, at least since the Doug Peterson era of it. It's like they've craved it and not been able to find it. If you think 2016, it's the failed DGB experiment. Bryce Treggs couldn't really get it done. 2017, Torrey Smith, in his own words, had one of the worst stretches of his career at one point. Then in 2018, Mike Wallace goes down. Shelton Gibson can't get it done. Like, what do you do in this spot now? Because they need to find a solidified wide receiver too. They need, like you said, someone that can at least take the top off a defense and get open downfield vertically. And I swear if you say Deshaun Jackson, like, I'm going to cry. So just, I mean, anyone bet at this point. But I mean, is there a guy you've got in mind, or is it just going to be looking at the draft? How important is that to find a wide receiver too?
It's huge. I mean, you have to find a deep threat. You mentioned all the guys. I mean, you can add Matt Collins to the list of guys that they've thought would be able to be a deep threat per se, a big play guy for them down the field. That has not worked out. I mean, Deshaun Jackson, look, he would obviously be the ideal fit here, right? I mean, he's still one of the best receivers in the league as a deep threat. He is. I mean, statistically, if you just look, I mean, he is. But he's also a guy that everyone keeps saying is going to lose a step, and he still hasn't. So maybe that's just not going to happen. I don't know. But I would be very surprised if Deshaun is back here. So that aside, in terms of who they'll target, you'd have to look at some of the guys that might come available. I mean, the Dolphins, I will say if they end up kind of starting a rebuild there, maybe they move on from Kenny Stills. He would be a great fit for them. There was a receiver in Detroit. His name is blanking me right now for some reason. Marvin Jones, maybe is who I'm thinking of. That has been a really great deep threat. So I do think there might be some options out there, but I think you're really going to find a better deep threat that you can count on for years in the draft.
Sure. All right, so we're going to go a little bit away from just strictly Eagles talk now and find out a little bit more just about yourself, because I feel like this is going to be something that a lot of people are interested in. Because, I mean, over the years, the articles you've put out, the interviews, the takes, and that sort of thing, there have been some really big highs, really big lows, and I think that's the same for anyone in this industry. Just kind of like looking back on like your career so far, what's been your proudest moment to date?
That's a good question. I would say, I don't know, picking one moment. I mean, like, I guess, covering the Super Bowl was definitely something I'll look back on when I'm older and be really happy about. I would say two things I'm proud of is just like how young I was when I got my first beat writing job. I mean, I'm 31 now, and I've been doing it for 7 years. So I'm proud of myself for that. But I think that what I'm most proud of in my career is just like, I just truly do love interacting with people on Twitter. And I think that I'm happy at a point where I have people that interact with me, some negative obviously, but it's all in good fun. So like, I think that's definitely the biggest, like, proudest moment of my career. It's just that I feel like I've like connected with the fans to a certain degree.
Yeah, I can relate. I mean, firstly, you don't look a day over 30, so there's that. I mean, and secondly, just like, with the Twitter thing as well, obviously you're one of the big presences in terms of Eagles Twitter. Is there ever a point where you're going to put something out, or you're going to put a take out, and you just, because at this point, you know the reaction you're going to get? Do you kind of feed off it a little bit? Is it like almost being The Rock or a wrestling star where you say it just to add a bit of salt to the wound, just to kind of spice that reaction up a little, or is it just strictly business?
I mean, look, we all like make jokes on Twitter. There's certainly moments where I joke around, but it is funny, like you mentioned that, because one of the top questions I always get is like, do you believe everything you tweet? And like, short of like a sarcastic joke every once in a while, like, I never tweet anything I don't believe. Like, people always tweet me like, this is clickbait. No way you believe that. Like, no, I believe everything I tweet. Like, I really think Jordan Matthews is super good. I would bring back Nick Foles. Like, so I really do believe that. Like, but the funny thing to me is people are always like, man, you talk about this so much. Like, yeah, my full-time job is to talk about the Eagles. Like, it's literally all I do during the day. So of course I talk about things a lot. But yeah, no, like I never I mean, I enjoy the interaction, like I said, and, certainly I enjoy a good debate. So I know there's certain issues people love to debate about, and I'll certainly talk about that. But I never tweet things just because if I don't believe them, I never tweet them just for a reaction.
That's fair. All right, so is there been a moment in your career you look back and wish you changed or that maybe didn't work out the way you thought it would?
One moment. I don't know. That's a tough question too. I mean, I guess I would say so I went to college and I studied broadcast journalism, and the result of that was I learned a lot more about video editing, audio editing, being on camera and that type of thing. And so I never really had super great training as a writer.
Right.
And when I look at because you're on Twitter, but the Eagles beat is just so many talented people on it,
yeah.
right? I'm lucky to work in an environment like that. Even though we're not coworkers, I'm around guys all day. So I would say one thing in my career that maybe I'm not proud of is just I wish that I could write long pieces that were as good as what Sheil Kapadia does or Zach Berman or that type of thing. So that is one thing I wish I did a better job at.
That's a really humble kind of look back in it. I think the thing with this industry as well, especially like you said, the Philadelphia beat, is that it is so jam-packed with talent from whether it's young or old or whoever, that there's always something new. Everyone's trying to get on top of each other. And it can get hostile. I mean, I'm sure we all remember what happened in the press box not too long ago with Les Bowen and that sort of thing. How intense do those tensions get when you're in that situation, seeing the same guys every day? Is it just Twitter beef and people sassing around? Is there a lot of respect there? Or are they guys that you just genuinely don't see eye to eye with and get a bit sarky sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say there's probably 10 guys that are really important and there all the time. And I honestly, from my opinion, I can only speak from my personal perspective, I feel we all get along really well. When we're, I see these guys all the time, in training camp every single day for a month. And I love hanging out with those guys, Jimmy Kempke, Zach Berman, Sheil, Dave Zangaro, all those guys. I think we all get along really well. There's definitely we're all of different ages. So there's that perspective, I guess I would say sometimes. But no, it's definitely I love going in and covering the team and being around those guys.
It's cool to hear. So, what are your plans moving forward for the off-season? Is there anything in the pipeline that you're excited to be working on?
Yeah, there's no off-season. You know what it is.
Yeah,
I know you hustle too, so you understand. No, I'm leaving for the combine in a week and a half. I would say just the thing I'm going to do next, I really need to start learning a lot about the draft. I got to start looking at some of these prospects and getting used to that type of thing, just because the way the season unfolded and all the quarterback stuff, it was hard for me to pay a ton of attention to college football. So I really got to start getting used to that. And I'm excited for it because the draft is one of my favorite times of the year. So I would say training camp is my favorite time. And then the draft is the other one, just because I love mock drafts. I love guessing who they'll try to get. I love trying to figure out who they'll get, learning about the prospects. So that's definitely what's up next for me.
Cool. And obviously, you came out to the game in London, right?
Yes, I did.
So, firstly, where was our romantic dinner? Because that never happened, and I'm heartbroken.
I know, man. You should have hit me up beforehand.
And second, how was that experience for you? Was that your first time in the UK?
Yeah, it was my first time out of the country in general. So that was, okay. It was awesome. The game itself was really cool. Just the stadium, the atmosphere around it. I haven't been to all of obviously this is my first one I've been to out of the country, but from what it sounds like, just from talking to NFL people that work the event, it sounds like this was one of the most attended, which doesn't surprise me when you consider Eagles fans and how well they travel. But, I got to spend the bye week was after that, so I spent a few more days in England, and then I went to Paris for a few days. So it was definitely a good time. I'm happy I got that experience.
So you had the full ESP on tour month then, by the sounds of it.
Amen.
So, what were your main takeaways, just out of interest, from England? What were your main takeaways, just culture-wise or food? Was there anything that surprised you?
I thought it was pretty cool. To me, honestly, though, I don't know if you've ever been to the States. I would assume you probably have. But, no, you haven't, man. You got to come out here, come to training camp or something like that. But to me, it literally was just kind of like America, only with, people with accents. I thought, Paris I thought Paris was much more different culturally than America, but I thought England was dope. Like, I don't know where you live over there, but like, it was just like, I stayed in the Notting Hill area, which was really cool. It's like a ton of really good restaurants. I went to this place called Sketch that was banging and like had a really cool bar attached to it. And I mean, it was my first time over there, so I did a lot of the touristy things, I would say, like, but I thought it was awesome. I had a really good time. I definitely want to head back out there soon.
Well, if you ever come back, I mean, we've got to go full, but we're going to have tea, crumpets, fish and shit, the whole.
Exactly.
We'll meet
I
the
got
Queen.
We'll
do
do
the
out there.
lot.
Yeah. Are you in England? Like, are you where? I'm not sure. Are you close to London or?
No, so I'm about 5 hours away, so I had to come up on a bus, which was a real pain.
Okay. All right,
yeah, so even for me, like, everyone's flying out for America, and it's taking like less time than it would take me. So yeah, wasn't good. Yeah, like, I'm going to try and get out there for training camp this year for sure. I think that's definitely on the agenda, just to finally come out and experience that side of it. But I guess while on that, I mean, what's your other than the Super Bowl? What's the favourite place that your job's taken you?
Well, this last year, the travel alone was super awesome. Like, I mean, it was Tampa Bay, Nashville, New Orleans. I would say New Orleans is the best stadium I've been to, just in terms of the atmosphere there. I think dome stadiums are really cool, the crowd. So I would say New Orleans is really cool. But just in general, like, I've been to almost every NFL stadium now. So just the ability to travel has been awesome.
That's awesome. All right, so one last question then before we let you go, because I know you're a busy guy. I don't want to keep you for... It's almost been 40 minutes. Oh, my God. I'm really sorry.
No, it's all good.
Obviously, you're a big Kanye West guy, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if you're going to rank, like, the top 3 albums, and you can't listen to any of the others that you leave outside of this top 3, what are they going to be?
So Dark Twisted Fantasy is obviously number 1 by a landslide. I don't even think that's a debate. Number 2... I would probably go College Dropout just because, like, to me, like, that's just a classic. I enjoy all those songs on there. There's a lot of, like, underrated ones, and I just couldn't imagine never being able to listen to some of those songs again. 3, that's tough. I mean, I don't want to say Pablo. Pablo is pretty good. Not Late Registration, although that's some classics. I don't know. Picking the third one would be tough. I guess I would probably pick Pablo if I had to pick a third. Yeah, I think so.
For me, I genuinely put Yeezus at number 1.
Yeah, see, I think that's just something people say. Like, Yeezus is very good, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, there's just way more classics and hits on the 3 I listed than Yeezus.
Yeah, I honestly feel like Yeezus is literally a mental breakdown in an album. And, like, you kind of hit all these... Yeah, like, if you hit all these... Like, how it starts off with this ego complex of, like, I'm a god, I'm the shit, I can do all this, that, and the other. And then it's like, oh, my God, like, everything's gone wrong a bit, and I keep cheating a little bit, and it's not going well. And you just hit... It's like... It's almost like a come down, like, from the start to finish. And, like, I really just rate that, like, the tempo of the album just sits a lot better. And I'm not sure if that's just production-wise or what, but I think, like, when I realised that, I was like, oh, that's actually, like, a really different kind of listen to any of the other albums.
Yeah, I mean, production-wise, I agree. Like, the beats on that are ridiculous, and, like, I do see all that, and, like, that's my thing. Like, if you want to say it's a better written album and it has, like, more of a cohesive type of, like, theme to it, I would agree. But at the end of the day, like, College Dropout, like, I mean, I was in, I think, 8th, 9th grade when that came out. Like, that's just always going to be a classic to me. So, Yeezus is very good, but I don't know, it's just sad to think of what has happened to Kanye since. But I would definitely go those 3 over Yeezus.
That's fair. All right, one last bonus question. How did you spend Valentine's Day?
Well, so last night, obviously made a little dinner for my girlfriend, had a good night. But, yeah, since it's Friday today, we're going to head out in the city. Got a reservation at Del Frisco's, to have a good time. So I'm excited for sure.
You little
How
romantic.
about you?
Very proud. See, I'm a little bit more lonely, me. I was just sat at home watching All 22, eating chocolate and listening to sad love songs. So.
I don't believe that. You gotta get out there.
It's all right. Hopefully when I get to America, the accent will kick in and my luck might change. But as of right now, it's just...
you come out here, come to training camp. We'll go out. I'll be your wingman. It'll be a good time.
See, now that would be a video series in itself. I think the world just needs to see. Just Eliot Shorr-Parks, Wingman, and Liam Jenkins. That would be the most iconic content of 2019, for sure.
Amen. For sure. Eagles Twitter couldn't handle it.
I don't think they could. All right, well, listen, Matt, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. If fans aren't already following you for whatever reason, where can they get a hold of your content?
At 94WIP.com and then at Eliot Shorr-Parks on Twitter. So I really appreciate you having me on, man.
No worries, man. One final note as well. I'm really annoyed at you low-key because 94WIP is geo-blocked in England, so I have to use a VPN to read your content.
I know.
It's heartbreaking.
That does
is it
suck.
just me?
And honestly, yeah.
I've
talked to him about that, and yeah, it's just nothing I can do about it. I'm aware of it. It sucks, I know, but sorry about that.
It's alright, man. I'm only just pulling you. But listen, enjoy the rest of your Valentine's type weekend. Best of luck for the season and what it is you've got planned over the next few months, and I'm sure I'll see you out in training camp for a series of Wingman in Nights Out.
All right, sounds good, man. I'll talk to you later.
A massive thank you to Eliot for coming on the show. I was genuinely pleasantly surprised by the debate we had, and you never know what to expect when you bring guests on. Some of them will say 2 words, some of them you can have a nice conversation with. And just being able to have that conversation, that back and forth with Eliot, I'm hoping was valuable to you guys. Maybe you see a different side to him now. That's the aim here. But before we go, of course, we've got a couple more things to get through. One of them is Thank You Next, which is an important part of the show. It is an infrastructure where we need to capitalise on because it's what makes us different, you know? And our love for Ariana Grande will never die. And you need to be part of that. So if you've submitted your questions on Twitter, Amy and Eliot haven't already kind of answered them or tried to get to them very shortly. But before we do, I feel like I'm going to bring this out. If you don't follow me on Twitter, at Liam Jenkins 21, you missed out on some top quality content not too long ago. So it got to around 4 a.m. I got very, very bored. And I was like, I wonder what my podcast would sound like auto-tuned. So I put it into GarageBand, I messed about with some settings, and the iconic quotes that came out, I just feel need to be vocalised. Like, you guys need to hear this. So if you're not following me on Twitter, this is the stuff you're missing at about 12 a.m. American time most days when I am so sleep deprived, I'm pretty much hallucinating that Nick Foles is in some sexy lingerie. So this is what came out of the Auto-Tune podcast from last week.
And already the amount of work. I mean, he's been to Haiti with Jordan Matthews to do work. He's already doing work in the communities with his food vans. I don't think a lot of people realise this, but his teammates absolutely love the guy.
It's just iconic. Like, there's no two ways about it.
Why would you, in that scenario, want to come back from injury when the team have won a Super Bowl and they're running around with their rings and their jackets and we keep saying hats?
There's some really good quotes in there, but of course the best one comes from Super Todd, and we'll get to this shortly.
One day, on posting an article saying that Nick Foles is going to be a free agent, someone commented saying, "Go outside, Liam Jenkins, get a life."
Now that comment, as you know, it caused a bit of a stir with me last week. It didn't sit too well, the old stomach. And I posted another article in that Facebook group, and Todd was at it again. He was at it again. He just doesn't like me, and I can't work out why. Now, I can't imagine for the life of me that Todd is going to listen to this podcast, but this is a guy, what I literally just, all I did was post an article in a Facebook group. Like, I'm doing a job for him. I'm showing him, like, hey, look, here's an interesting story for you to read where you can learn more about the team you follow and get a different slant on it or something like that. And he literally just puts, your clickbait article sucked. I tried to read the garbage, but I couldn't, all I can tell you believe in Howie. I mean, that was almost poetic in itself, to be honest, Todd. That was brilliant. So I sent him a Valentine's card. I thought that was the appropriate measure to take here. He's, you know, clearly needing some loving, so I decided to send him that. He said, "F this spam BS, your reporting sucks ass too." I mean, I wouldn't say it's spam. The title of the article was "The Defensive Tackle Domino Effect That Could Transform the Eagles' Front Seven." I wouldn't really call that spam, Todd, but hey, I mean, you've got less hair than me, which doesn't, I mean, my hairline is going backwards very quickly. Maybe that's why you're a little bit annoyed. I don't know. I mean, you look pretty happy in your profile picture. You're on a beach. Why wouldn't you be happy of being on a beach with those, he's got those tinted sunglasses on, you know? Like, he's living his best life. And then he's bitter about, and then he just puts another comment saying, ass. Like, why? Just, come on, Todd. Let me do my thing. Come on the show. We'll have a chat. Someone tag Todd, alright? If you're in that group. Oh, my, I can't believe it. It's just iconic, to be honest with you. I'm just trying to work out why he's so annoyed. But, you know, it does lead us on to the final part of the show, which is Thank You Next. Now, I've tried to answer as many of these questions with Eliot as possible because I feel like many of them just kind of slip into conversation anyway. But there were a few that we ultimately missed. I think that's purely because we're talking about me and Elliot with Supreme Cash Cannon sunglasses on in a Philadelphia nightclub, wingmanning me. Now, I can't imagine a situation where me, a 6'3", gangly-looking tree, would have any luck with the ladies. I mean, based off previous experience, I wonder if I'll be out of my feelings by then. There's another interesting... Who knows? But anyway, we're going to get into Thank You Next, guys, where, again, if you want to submit your questions, at Liam Jenkins 21, I was going to try and do it in French, which I think is croissant de, and I realised croissant is a food, so it's maybe not that. But un, de, oh? I don't know. It's 21 in French, okay? Whatever it is, I need to learn that. Actually, well, before we get to it, there's a funny story that we're going to chip in, because it's been the most Eagles-related podcast ever, this. So, when I was in college, there was a friend... I was 18 years old at the time, okay? So I still had my little greeby haircut, and there was a French exchange student that come over. And I was like, oh, okay, she's pretty cute. I'm going to try and slide over, see what English Liam can do, see if he can maybe have his way with a woman, which would be a rarity. So I go over, I'm like, salut, and she smiles and she says hello back, and I'm like, yes, off we go. And I go, je m'appelle le jardin, and I was like, oh, that sounds saucy, doesn't it? That just sounds beautiful. And she just started laughing and walked away, and I didn't really understand why, and then I told my friends what I said, and I basically just said that I'm called the Garden. So, if ever you're going to talk to someone in French, don't tell them your name is literally a plot of land with some trees around it, would be my best advice for you. Anyway, on to Thank You Next. We're going to start off with a question we haven't asked yet, or answered yet, I should say, already. Starting with, at Tom_Udzinski, should the Eagles sign J-Mac to a long-term deal? I don't think it should be a long-term deal, maybe a 1-year or a 2-year deal. The Eagles don't have the financial, I would say, swimming space to enable to orchestrate that. If I'm genuinely looking at this from a GM perspective, I feel like there is room for negotiation there. I think Matthews comes back. To what capacity, I don't know, but I feel like that could be the ultimate WR2 scenario. Thank you. Next, Xavier Tucker. Do you think the Eagles try to add an elite cornerback? No, not really. It wouldn't surprise me if they draft one, or maybe if they go through free agency and find a Patrick Robinson kind of acquisition where it's a prove-it contract. But at this stage where you've got that much depth anyway, I don't think they need to. It's growing in the right direction. All you need in that scheme is someone that is a reliable tackler. If you have Rasul Douglas and Jalen Mills outside, or maybe not Jalen Mills, we'll work on that. But yeah, someone like Avonte Maddox, obviously you've got Sidney Jones in the nickel. There's a plethora of cornerbacks that you can rotate around. I think you can get by with what you've got currently. So whether or not they go for another, who knows. Thank you. Next, at Smooth22_Sonic, who's #1 penguin in Smash. Now, I don't know if that means penguin in Smash Brothers, or he's the #1 penguin that's smashing. And if that's the case, man, I hope you enjoy Valentine's Day. You get that penguin P. If Gritty likes the Fusion, does that mean you're legally required to also like them? Not legally, but it'd be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, I kind of like the Fusion. I use a Gillette Fusion razor 3 times a year for those odd occasions that I do actually trim the mild facial hair that comes onto my skin. So, yeah, I like the word Fusion, and I'm sure the esports team will be just as good as that razor that my mum bought me and I used 3 times. I had the same pot of shaving foam from age 16 to around 21. Good effort there. Thank you. Next, Dave Serenino. We've spoken about Brandon Graham anyway, Dave, so hopefully you got your answer in that bit of conversation. And believe it or not, one of the questions we actually had was, go outside, Liam Jenkins, get a life. I think this needs to be a jingle. This genuinely needs to be a jingle. So from King B Jeremy, who has now made this a meme, this has to be our new intro. Just go outside, Liam Jenkins, get a life. I think I'd be doing myself an injustice if it wasn't. Trying to look back and see what other questions you guys have asked. We did post on YouTube as well. So, let me, on the spot, go through our YouTube comments. Did we get any questions? Oh, we had 5 comments. So, one says, should the Eagles open up contract talk with Golden Tate or not? I think one of them... if we look at his Twitter feed, I'd say they're already open. Whether they're going well or not, that's up for a real debate. But I don't think that they're going to plan if you're Golden Tate. So, should they open negotiations if they're not already? No, if I'm brutally honest. I think you bring back Jordan Matthews, you let Aguilar walk, or you trade him, and then you end up signing either a rookie in the draft to fill in the slot, or you go into the free agency pool and poach out someone there. I think 9 million for Aguilar is too much. I think what Golden Tate's going to seek will be too much for someone of his age. I think, we'll end it there. I genuinely don't think there's a reason to go out and acquire Golden Tate or go out of your way to make sure you invest in bringing him back, so to speak. Thank you. Next, Charles Hutton. Good work, Joey. This mock draft gets so friggin' maddening. Changes every day with so much speculation. I'm waiting for the draft. I don't know who Joey is. My name's Liam, Charles, and I don't know where the mock draft is, really. So I don't really know what you're getting at there, but I'm waiting for the draft too, Charles. So we'll wait together. Thank you. Next, Jeffrey Torres. Should coaches and Eagles fans be worried about Carson Wentz's injury reappearing this season once again? If you mean the back injury, no. If you mean the ACL, no. If I'm on it, I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue. The main problem will be the recovery aspect of it. And although ESP was very much there's no excuses, we don't know the severity of it. It obviously kept Wentz sidelined. And although he was kind of good to go towards the end of the season and the Eagles kept him out, you've got to nurse it and you've got to make sure the player is comfortable resting his weight on that leg. So I think it is still going to be, of course it's bound to be a slight concern. Look at Sam Bradford, for God's sake. You've got to be aware of every situation. It won't be anywhere near as damning, though, as it was in 2018. Wow, why did I have my real name on here? Should Wendell Smallwood be in the rotation with our starting running backs? Keep up the good work. Oh, thank you. Why should I have my real name on here? You should have that, because I can then say thank you properly. But I'll just call you W for now. The old Dub Dog. Should Wendell Smallwood be in the rotation? I think he's earned that by this point. I think that's a safe assumption to make. Sure, he's not going to be your bell cow or a lead back, but it's a change of pace guy, someone that has evolved year on year and gone from a jack of all trades, master of none, to a reliable blitz protector, to someone that can now get out and make some receptions. He's at a career high in receptions. I think you can make the argument that he does deserve at least one more year as a spot in the rotation. And thank you. Next, finally, Lol Map Scone. What's a jawn? Now, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what a wah-wah is, if I'm honest. But as far as I'm aware, it's a word that can be applied to anything and just means, look at that jawn. And then whatever you're looking at is said jawn, as far as I'm aware. But when I say it's not look at that jawn, it's look at that jawn. And I feel like that's a very different, emphasis there. So maybe I'm saying it. Maybe I should go look at that John. And then actually saying John, and it sounds like I'm looking at a man. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just not looking at John in that way. I'm too busy, trying to get over some girl that has been mentioned in this podcast a million times by now. So sorry, John, it's not on you. It's me. But we're going to end it there, guys. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. If you want to leave a like, make sure you're rating 5 stars on iTunes. That would be absolutely amazing. If you want to take over the podcast game in 2019, this is something a little bit different. I hope you've enjoyed it. From myself, Liam Jenkins, I will see you next time for another episode of The Outside Insider.